Wonderful. Okay. So today's session is going to be covering three different areas. The first section we're going to look at is what is motivation? What do we mean by motivation? And what makes up motivation? The second part is going to be asking, how do we make motivation successful? And the third section is going to be having a look at some tools that you can use to help motivate your learners. So these will be your practical takeaways that you can take from the session. So, as a running theme throughout, we're also going to be touching on assessment. I know this is something that's thrown up a few curveballs for a lot of teachers over the last year in particular. So we're going to be touching on that throughout the session as well. So I hope you enjoy it and I hope you get involved. So first things first, what is motivation? Can you please, in the chat box, just tell me, what does motivation mean to you? Is it determination? Is it perseverance? What does it mean? Give me some feedback. I want to see your answers in the chat box. Khaled, straight away, it's the forces and the endurance learners to engage the activity. Willing to learn, eagerness to learn, engaged. Intrinsic, I just saw. Oh, wow, this is going really quick. Passion, interest. Amazing. Lots of really positive language there. The drive to learn. Yeah, drive is definitely the verb, isn't it? Eagerness, willingness, passion, happy to learn, wanting to learn. Very good. I'm sorry, I can't see who's put in these comments because it's going so quickly. I can only catch the comments themselves. Fantastic. Thank you, guys. I came across this cartoon on the internet recently, and I'll give you a second just to take a look at it. So I don't know about you, but looking at this cartoon, this really resonated with me as to what motivation feels like. And there were lots of positive comments in the chat box, but there were lots of different comments. And I think it's really important to start off this session by acknowledging that motivation can mean different things for different people. So that needs to be a really big takeaway from this session when we're thinking about how motivation affects our learners and also how it affects us as teachers and the peers that we work with. So often when we talk about motivation, and I know that some people put this in the chat box already, they talk about intrinsic drivers and extrinsic drivers. But what do we mean by intrinsic and extrinsic motivational factors? Well, there's a few different factors that make them up. So if we focus on different types of intrinsic motivators, also referred to as internal motivation, you can see that we've got a bit of a list there. So just to have a look at these together now. So the first one, if we look at types of internal motivation we have, is learning. So we can also refer to this as competence motivation. So this is when you are motivated just by the act of learning. This is what's motivating you to become more competent at something. We also have attitude. So this is when you are motivated by the way that you or others can feel. A good example of this is maybe if you are volunteering, you volunteer because you want other people to feel good and that makes you feel good. It's all about your attitude towards it. We also have achievement. So when you are driven by the desire of an achievement and not the reward attached to it. So for example, you might be running in a race and for you just want to be able to do it and cross that finish line. You don't care about the gold medal, silver medal, bronze medal for taking part that you're going to get around your neck. It's just the achievement of doing it. Creation is a really big one. I have a ukulele and I like to play my ukulele just because I enjoy creating sounds on it. I'm not playing it because I want to become a ukulele rock star. I just enjoy the creation behind it. And then there's the physiological side of it. So here, this could be our inner primal feelings that push us to do certain things. Maybe you've come across that expression, to do something for the love and not the money. And this is a really good example of that. Then we've got these different types of extrinsic or external motivational factors. So, for example, we can talk about incentives. So this is when you are motivated by the reward. The reward becomes the incentive for taking part and doing whatever it is you're doing, whether it's running a race or maybe it's a financial incentive if you hit a certain target at work. It's also worth looking at the negative things that can affect us when it comes to types of external motivation. Say fear, for example, the fear of losing. You don't want to lose, so you're going to push to make sure that you don't lose. Power as well. This can be seen as something either positive or negative. It's when you're motivated to have power and control, maybe over your life, maybe also over other people's or over tasks and activities. And then affiliation. So this is that sort of social motivation, when you're motivated by social factors, you know, that feeling of belonging, becoming part of a group. It might be the motivation for you to make new friends if you start university, or to introduce yourself to people if you start a new job and you introduce yourself to your colleagues. So as we can see, there's lots of different factors that make up both internal and external motivation. It's important to point out as well that these things, they don't always stand alone and they can often cross over. So they can interlink with each other, and this communication that we get between intrinsic and extrinsic motivators is really embedded in what we refer to as self-determination theory. And this is a term that I wasn't really that familiar with before I started doing research into motivation. I'd encourage you to visit selfdeterminationtheory.org if you want to learn more about it. Here's a quote taken from their website, which talks about what we mean by self-determination theory. And it's when the conditions supporting the individual's experience of autonomy, competence, and relatedness are argued to foster the most volitional and high quality forms of motivation and engagement for activities. Volitional, we're talking about our willpower, what that driver is there. So do take the time to go and explore this more if this is something that you're interested in. Joanna's just shared a link in the chat box for you. So, how well do we know our intrinsic and extrinsic motivators? Intrinsic motivators can be things like enjoying role plays or activities, those creative things that we mentioned earlier. If we're thinking about them in terms of a EFL classroom or English language classroom, these are activities which, you know, might be quite prominent in terms of putting intrinsic motivators into the activities we do with our learners. And if we're looking at the English language class and we're thinking about extrinsic motivators, it could be something like getting a good grade. Often intrinsic motivators are connected to things like exams and assessment. Doesn't always have to be the case, but quite often it is. But there's lots of other activities that can happen both in and out of the language classroom. And so I just want to do a little activity with you guys to see if you recognize them as being intrinsic or extrinsic. So let's have a look at the first one here. So in the chat box, I'd like you to type I for intrinsic or E for extrinsic? What do you think this activity is? Chatting with your peers because you like the social interaction. If it's something that you like, something that you enjoy, something that just gives you pleasure, yes, it's very much an intrinsic motivator. Well done if you put I. Okay, next up. Following a reward program in school, for example, house points. Oh, I've just given that one away. So if you're not familiar with house points, think Harry Potter. So you've got your different houses in Harry Potter. I don't know what they're all called. Gryffindor, Slytherin. So these are definitely an intrinsic push here. The reward is getting those points for your group and for your house. Okay, what about this one? Reading your favorite book, even though you've read it many times before. Oh, we've got a bit of a mix here, E's and I's. So this right here is very much sitting within our intrinsic factors. Very good. Studying for a college exam to get a good grade. So you're studying for the exam because you want the good grade. That's what's important to you. You don't care about the process of studying for the exam or the exam itself. I can see lots of E's. Yeah, very good. This is very much an extrinsic factor here. How about this one? Learning about something you're curious about. Someone put both. Interesting. Curiosity is definitely something that we would associate with this intrinsic factor here. So I'm really interested in anthropology. So whenever I get a free moment, I might read something online about it or maybe watch a video about it just because I'm curious. I'm just really interested in it. I don't want a degree or a certificate in it. I'm just interested and curious. What about this one here? Playing an online game and not wanting to lose. Now, we mentioned fear earlier, the fear of losing. Where would this sit? Yeah, fantastic. So very much extrinsic. Okay, well done everybody for that activity. It's really nice to get you engaged and to know that you can still hear me. Okay, so moving on. So it's important to know what intrinsic and extrinsic factors our learners respond to. This can really help teachers in creating engaging lessons and helping their learners to achieve whatever the learning outcomes are. In order to know what motivates our learners, we need to understand our learners. So we're now going to do a task which is going to make us think a bit more about who our learners actually are. So what are your students like? I would like to know. This activity involves you taking one of the letters from the word student, and I want you to think of an adjective or maybe a phrase starting with that letter that best describes your students, or maybe a particular student you have in mind. For example, if you choose the letter S, you might use the adjective shy. Maybe your students are shy or smart, as I can see someone put in the chat box. Maybe you choose the letter E. You want to see as a phrase, your students are enthusiastic about speaking. Slackers, Veronica. Let's see, what are your students like? Eager, smart, diligent, talkative? Distracted, I saw. Dynamic, very nice. Eager to speak, lovely. Studious. Trendy, unique. Satisfied, very nice. Talkative, enthusiastic. Naughty. Driven, that's nice. Stubborn sometimes. Nervous. Okay. Fantastic. Sounds like you guys know who your students are, you know what they're like, and these are very much characteristics of people that we're describing right here. Something like this is quite personal, and I think when we're talking about something like motivation, it is quite personal. So it's really good to understand the kind of characters that our students are. Okay, so whether the reasons are intrinsic or extrinsic, motivation can be found in all of us through many different drivers. And by understanding which driver our students best respond to, we can be better prepared in using motivation as a tool for learning. So if we know that good grades are important to our learners, but they also want to have fun and play games in our lessons, then we can make gamification a part of our exam-focused practice in the class. Or if our learners enjoy talking about their individual interests, then maybe we can get them to deliver a presentation on what they enjoy, what their passion is. Either way, we need to understand what our learners are like and use this to your advantage. So if you're not sure what your students are like, you can ask them if you're not sure what they're interested in and what their passions are. So I'm going to share an activity with you. This is by Nikki Hockley. She wrote one of our focus papers on online learning. And this is an activity called About Me. And if you go to our website and find our focus paper, you'll be able to find this activity or a link to this activity. So the first step in this activity is to choose a topic that you as the teacher like, a topic that you're interested in. And you're going to create an audio recording about it. And you can do this maybe using your phone. You can record your voice onto a audio app you've got, or if you've got a learning management system that you use at your school, maybe you can upload some audio recording to there. You could write it as well, but sometimes it's quite nice to have some different media when we're learning. The next stage is to share that recording with your students. So you're going to share it out, your students are going to listen to it, and then you're going to ask your students to send you 2 or 3 questions about it. And this is really good because it actually, tests that they've actually listened to your recording. You're then going to respond to your students' questions in a new audio recording. And then you're going to ask your students to create and share their own recordings. So now your students get to choose a topic that's focused on them. You've modelled how you want them to produce that, and they're going to then get the mic, get the opportunity to share their passion, share what they're really interested in. Okay, so moving on, how do we make motivation successful? So this section here is going to focus on 3 different areas. The first one, as we can see on the screen, is the teacher. We're also going to have a look at the student and at the classroom. So to start us off, the teacher. I'm going to talk about 3 different areas that we as teachers can focus on when we want to try and really encourage motivation in our lessons, whether that's the face-to-face lessons or the remote ones. And the first tip here is to be enthusiastic. So not only is motivation and passion good for teacher well-being, it's really good and studies have shown that teachers' engagement and enjoyment of teaching can have a positive effect on their learners' experience. So if you're familiar with Sari Mercer and Tammy Gregerson's title, Teacher Wellbeing, This is a quote I've taken from it. And they say that if teachers are motivated and passionate about their work, the chances are much higher that their learners will be too. So reflect on your own learning experiences and the teachers that you've had. Did they enthuse you? When I think about my recent learning experiences, a couple of years ago, I was having French lessons, and I'll be honest, learning a second language isn't something that comes very naturally to me. But what I really enjoyed about the lessons I attended was the enthusiasm that my French teacher had. He was the reason why I would go back every week, even though I wasn't necessarily that great at the lessons. I wanted to try because he was really encouraging, and that was really motivating for me. And I'm sure that you've all probably experienced something like that during your learning journeys too. Yes, Karen's just said the teacher makes a lot of difference. Very much so. So this kind of ties into this idea of encouraging our learners. And here, I just want to be really clear and say that as teachers, we can't be expected to hold the hands of our learners all the time. We really want to encourage a bit of learner agency amongst them. But you need to show that you're rooting for your learners. I think providing direct feedback as well to learners can really help you to express this encouragement. Another area that I want to talk about is something called nudge theory. Does anybody know what we mean by nudge theory? Has anyone come across nudge theory before? Mainly no's. That's fine. So nudge theory is this way that it's this concept that we can influence people's behaviors, whether it's their actions or their attitudes, without directly telling them what to do. So I watched a really interesting program on nudge theory where it's talking about eating habits. Can I ask you guys, do you have a treat cupboard? By a treat cupboard, I mean a cupboard in your kitchen where maybe you have some chocolate or some biscuits, some food that you know isn't very healthy for you, but it's there if you want to treat yourself every now and then. I have one. I'm sure you guys have one too. I'm sure it's not just me. There's a few yeses, there's a few no's. Wow, well done. So a lot of people saying yes, of course. Who doesn't? Yeah. What about a fruit bowl? Do you have a bowl which has your apples and your bananas and your oranges in it? And if you have a fruit bowl, where is it? Is it in a cupboard? Do you have it on the side? Do you see it often? Is it easier to take a piece of fruit than it is to take a biscuit from the treat cupboard? So you probably find subconsciously you're nudging yourself to the healthier behavior. You're nudging yourself towards the fruit bowl more so than the treat cupboard. So there's actually lots of examples of nudge theory in our day-to-day lives. So how does this look in the context of learning? Well, nudge theory can be delivered through lots of different mediums in the classroom. It can be delivered a lot through remote teachings, through using things like emails and messages and LMS systems like Moodle and Canvas. We can drop little nudges to our students to get them to, do an activity or get them to try something out that maybe they've not tried before. And there's lots of evidence to show that this works really well with learning. Isha Sud from eLearning Industry says, nudge, without being intrusive, is an excellent tool to make learners drive their own learning and be in charge of it. So if you want to learn more about nudge theory, there's a ton of information out there. Have a look, maybe check out e-learning industry as well. Read up about nudge theory in the classroom. It's really interesting. Chris, I'm sorry I nudged you to get the biscuits. Not till after the session though. You can hold on. Okay, so moving on, the student. So let's think about 3 areas that can really help to motivate students, or students can motivate themselves. So the first one I want to mention is self-awareness. So promoting self-awareness amongst your learners, it can really help to inform what motivates them and what demotivates them. And it's very important to also acknowledge the demotivating factors as well as the motivational ones. So think about what works well for them in making learning successful. How can they apply this to their studies? Think back to that About Me activity that we looked at, and how that helped us learn what motivated our learners. Activities like that can also provide reflection for the learner themselves. So it's not uncommon to ask a learner, well, what are you interested in? What do you enjoy doing? And then to just shrug and be like, I don't know. Sometimes it's a hard question for us to respond to. So if you make an activity out of it, it's making them more self-aware about, actually, I enjoy this kind of stuff, or I don't enjoy this kind of stuff. Another area to touch on, and this might sound very simple, but organisation. And here I think learner training really comes into play. So it's important to ensure that our learners know how and where to access study materials, and we should never assume that our students just know how to study. There are skills involved to the act of studying itself. So having a pen and a notebook to come to class is something which we might think is really obvious, but students don't always think about that. And I think it's really easy for students to become demotivated when they start to sort of lose scope of where they are with their studies, and where am I now? What am I studying for? Where's this journey going? And by having a bit of self-discipline and a bit more organisation, it can really help. But sometimes as a teacher, we have to support that, and we have to show them what organisation looks like. And this kind of ties into the last section, which is students' learning goals. So these are also referred to learning outcomes, and these can help our students to maintain focused on their studies. They also lay out the shared expectations between us as the teacher and them as the student. If you have regular tutorials with your students, make sure that you discuss what their learning goals are. And don't, make these a kind of top-down thing. We're telling them these are what you need to be doing. Encourage this as a bottom-up process, so the students are thinking about what they want to achieve. Remember, motivation is personal, huh? And then lastly, we've got the classroom. So the classroom is, a really important space for learning, whether that's the physical classroom or the virtual classroom. The environment in which we study, it's really conducive to our achievements. So in the physical classroom, it's important to try and make the environment as pleasant for the learners as possible. Ask yourself, is this a space that I would want to learn in? And is it comfortable? Are there prompts around the classroom that remind me what I'm here for? Things like having verb charts on the wall or CEFR can-do statements can be really great for nudging our learners, and also making this learning environment for them to be in. And if you are using sort of an online platform as well, take the time to get to understand the tools of the platform that you're using, how these can be utilised to help keep your students focused and motivated to learn. If you want to learn more about how to manage your learners online, OUP has got a really fantastic Learn at Home webpage. This provides lots of really great tips for you managing online learning. and it's something that's grown a lot over the last 12 months. So please go and check it out. That could be really helpful. So I'd want to share with you this quote. This is from Nick Thorner. He's the author of Motivational Teaching. And he says, though motivation seems straightforward in theory, I need to move the box. It becomes far from simple to grasp in practice, especially when we consider a long, complex process like learning. Okay. So, how do we make motivation successful? Well, sometimes we need to just teach it. It's not uncommon for us to have a student who says, I'm bored with this, I'm bored with learning English. I'm sure at some point you've had a student who, if they haven't said it, then they've definitely emanated it. So we can really combat this with one-to-one tutorials. I know I mentioned one-to-one tutorials before. So if you're not able to sit down and have a one-to-one tutorial with your student, maybe because you have a lot of students and it is very time consuming, things like questionnaires work really well and make them really accessible. So here, how do you feel about listening activities? Using emojis to get the students to express how they feel about it. And then opening it up more by asking, well, what would help to improve listening activities? And maybe their response would be nothing, but maybe they'll think, well, actually, I'd really enjoy it if we did more of this, if we did more of that. You know, it's going to be a personal response. So it's really good to have open questions, but also to make it sort of easy for your students to be able to answer, and keep it anonymous as well. We just want to know what's going to make tasks more successful for our learners, what will make them motivated more to learn. Things like this also work well if you've got low-level learners as well, so you don't have that language barrier too much. Emojis work very well for that. You can also, if you've got a student who says, I'm not interested in these topics, think about more personalised activities. Maybe if we go back to that About Me task that we looked at earlier, again, that task is coming back to support us. From that, we can hear what our students are interested in and what topics interest them. And one thing that I've definitely noticed as a teacher is that even if your students don't have the language level that you think that maybe they need to be able to do the task, if it's an activity that they're really interested in, that right there can really push them to just give it a go. I remember when I was teaching a group of Italian students and they were preparing for their Trinity Jessie exam. If you're not familiar with the Trinity Jessie, it's a general English speaking exam. And some of my students, they weren't really very engaged in it. But then when they discovered that they could talk about football as their topic for conversation, they really shone and they really took to the stage. That was the classroom. And all of a sudden they knew football. This was their passion. And yeah, I'll talk about football, even though it's in a language that I'm not used to speaking. And this really pushed them to do well. And it pushed them and they passed the exam. So, you know, there was that motivation there by looking back and seeing how talking about their passion really enabled them to get to where they didn't even realize they needed to get to. Okay. And then you might have students saying, well, I don't see the point in learning English. Well, inspire your learners, remind them about where they can go and what they can do if they've got English language under their belt. Okay, I can see we've got about 7 minutes left. So this is the last section here. And I'm just going to focus a little bit on assessment. We can see there's a girl here, sat down, taking an exam. How do you think she feels right now? What's her emotion right now? Nervous? She feels bad, she feels stressed. Why does she feel like this? What's causing this emotion? Unsure, lost, confused, frustrated. Yeah. She doesn't know, she doesn't know what to do. And this can cause lots of stress and frustration. I think it's really important to remind ourselves that, you know, students need to know what they're doing in order to be motivated to do it. I know that sounds like almost a little bit of a backward statement to make, but think about how many times we've maybe tested our students on something they don't really even know anything about. Maybe we do it a lot with our placement tests. So students can get really demotivated if you're presenting something to them that they just don't really know anything about. So I'm going to share with you something that Gordon Stober has, where he's written a lot of our material at AEP on assessment, and he released a position paper looking at assessment for learning, and he's got lots of practical tips about assessment and how it can tie in with motivating our learners in the classroom. Okay, so he talks about steps that you as a teacher can take, and I'm not able to move my slides. Is someone able to move my slides for me? Thank you. So the first step he talks about a teacher can take in the classroom is that they can gather information about their learners and about where their learners are in their learning, what they know and what they don't know. Okay, next slide, please. Teachers can help their students understand the what and the why of why they're learning and what successful performance will look like. Next slide, please. Teachers can give feedback, which helps learners to really close the gap. And Gordon Stover talks a lot about closing this gap of where students are in their learning and where they need to get to. And the last slide. Teachers can encourage learners to become more self-regulating and reflective. And this really touches on a lot of things we've talked about already in the session, especially when we're talking about qualities that we can instill as a teacher, like encouragement, qualities that we can try and instill in our students, like that self-awareness. So this is just a light overview of how we can touch on assessment and that link to motivation. So here's a quote that I just want to leave you with. This is from Lightbound and Spada from How Languages Are Learned. Next slide, please. So teachers can make a positive contribution to students' motivation to learn if classrooms are places that students enjoy coming to because the content is interesting and relevant to their age and level of ability. The learning goals are challenging yet manageable and clear, and the atmosphere is supportive. So I'm going to end it there on a high because I know there's only 3 minutes left. Thank you so much for your patience. Apologies for the technical hiccup at the start. We will hopefully be able to share out some of the practical tips that I wasn't able to get round to sharing with you guys at the end there. But I hope you've enjoyed the session. Do I have time to respond to any questions?
Go on, Charlotte. I'm going to give, because you stopped earlier than I was anticipating you to. You've got a chance to answer a couple of questions. Go on, because I've taken the automation off, so don't panic. But just only a couple of questions.
Okay, great. So Liliana has asked, what are your best 3 tips to get motivation with young adult learners? That's a good question. I don't really know if I'd have 3 tips. I think I'd have 1 tip with my adult learners, and that would be to ask them what motivates them. You know, if they're young adults, they should have that self-awareness of why they're learning and how they envision their learning journey. I'd say 1 tip, ask them, and that might be through a face-to-face tutorial or maybe a questionnaire. Yeah. Cyber's asked, how can we trigger intrinsic motivation? That's a really good question. I think it's really learning about who your students are to understand what intrinsically motivates them. So earlier on, we talked about the activity of, getting to know you, that About Me activity, where we're asking students to talk about their passion. How can we address computer literacy issues of students to improve motivation and satisfaction? Yeah, that's a really good question. So again, this ties into that learner training that we touched on slightly. Why not have a session on how to use Microsoft Word? I know that might sound not very engaging, but actually it's really useful and it's practical, and you know that your students are going to have to possibly use it if you do use it, that is. Have a session on it and work on it collaboratively as well. Okay, I can see that I'm out of time, so I'm really sorry I was only able to answer 3 questions there. But thank you very much for attending this session. It's been a joy sharing it with you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of ELTOC 2021.
Thank you, Charlotte. Can you hear me, Charlotte?
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Katie. I just got a message that Katie said she'd muted me. So thank you so much. You did an absolutely amazing job there, and I mean the audience will realise what stress you must have been under to get that talk on. And I am in awe as a presenter. I'm in awe of how you managed to get that in time and keep it all sensible while under all that stress. So thank you so much for that. It was a really informative talk, really engaging.